Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. Well, today is one of those days where I haven't done a podcast in a long time, and I thought I would talk in depth about Shadowdark. Basically, Shadowdark is a tabletop role-playing game, and it is essentially Dungeons and Dragons. It is a clone of D&D. We know what that is, okay? For those of you who've played games, you know what that is. And I really feel like rather than doing a review, what is more important is I talk about my experience with this game. And that is the thing I want to focus on today. I'm going to put up a poll, so feel free to take part in that poll if you want to. If you don't, you don't. That's fine, but it would be very helpful if you do. Sit back, get comfortable, grab some food, some drink, and let's talk about what I think is one of the more important games in the tabletop role-playing game community in a very long time. Okay, let's get started. Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Weller, and for those of you who are unaware, I used to be called How to D&D or How to Dungeons and Dragons. And so today I want to talk about Shadowdark, which is essentially a clone of Dungeons and Dragons. It's been around for, well, I would say since 2023, so it's a new game, and it's starting to find its legs. It's had a Kickstarter just recently, which did very well. The original one made over $1 million, and the second one's made over $2 million. So that's great. Like, it's finding its legs. But before I go into this and I talk about this game, I want to say right now, when you see a title that says Shadowdark is better, Dungeons and Dragons, ? This is not a review. I'll make that clear, okay? Is this to get you thinking? Yes, it is. Do I have an argument whether I'm going to answer that question? Yes, I am. But I also want to say that everyone is allowed and should, everybody is allowed and should have their own preferred version of Dungeons and Dragons, or a clone of Dungeons and Dragons, or whatever game they want to play. That is not what this podcast is about, okay? I have read original D&D, AD&D, first and second. Second AD&D was the first book that I ever bought for Dungeons and Dragons. I have played 3.5. I have interacted with version 3, 4, 5, and, I've played Pathfinder. I've interacted with other clones, Morkbork. There's a bunch of them out there. Whether it's Dungeon Crawl Classics, Castles and Crusades, or anything else that is related or very much connected to the mechanical nature of Dungeons and Dragons and how it's laid out, that's good. Okay, I'm all about that sort of thing. One of the things I've noticed when it comes to discussions around Shadowdark is that the Shadowdark game does nothing unique or original, nothing new. There's nothing new. And the truth is that there is nothing unique or new about the rules or the mechanics in Shadowdark. I've been playing this game for just over 6 months now, and I was playing it a little bit before that as well. But that's beside the point, because every role or game mechanic has already been done at some point during the history of Dungeons and Dragons. Like original Dungeons and Dragons and basic Dungeons and Dragons, Rule Cyclopedia, like almost all tabletop role-playing games are based on one of the mechanics in this game. This one here. And quite often original D&D. And a lot of advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So it would be ridiculous to think you could invent something else. It's all been done before. Okay, and even if it's not done by Dungeons and Dragons, there are other publications of tabletop role-playing games that have been done in the past, going right back, that have done something, okay, that D&D didn't do, that has been done before. So do not expect a tabletop role-playing game to be completely original. It is a ridiculous thing to think. The whole point of Shadowdark is to be a Dungeons and Dragons clone. That is what it is. The great thing about Shadowdark that I find is it is a clever and very elegant combination of minimal game rules to form a really streamlined version of a Dungeons and Dragons clone. Okay, that's essentially what it is. If you look at it, so I'm going to present my argument to you for the pros and cons based on my experience playing the game, running the game, and designing stuff for the game, because I've done that as well. And I want to sort of share that with you. So I'm going to go through and present sort of my argument. I have a lot of things to say. It's going to take me a while, so bear with me. And I am happy for people to share their opinions, but I am simply sharing my opinion. Okay, and that is it. Very simple. Kelsey Dion has a really firm understanding, well-developed understanding of Dungeons & Dragons and tabletop role-playing games, which means she's not designing by public opinion, like, frankly, the Dungeons & Dragons 2024 surveys were. Like that was a terrible mess. When you start asking people whether they like something or don't like something, and you're asking the wrong questions, you're going to have a problem. One of the things that we have to remember is that if you get the players to tell you how the game should play, they will design the fun and the challenge out of the game completely. It will simply no longer exist. Also, too, Kelsey has played older versions of D&D and new versions of D&D. And she's very much based Shadowdark on older versions of Dungeons & Dragons and new versions of Dungeons & Dragons, 5e and basic or AD&D, as far as I can tell. Okay, and she said as much. It's not news, and I think a lot of people have said that the popularity or the emphasis behind Shadowdark is just because Kelsey is lesbian. No, it's not. No. You can look at it that way, but seriously, no, the game is a good game. It's a good game. It's not just about that sort of thing. Was it well marketed? Was there a community behind Kelsey before this? Yes, there was. That is really beside the point. Okay, we're getting off the beaten track. Let's deal with the facts. Let's deal with the game itself. One of the great things about Shadowdark, and not all games do this, but some do, is that the Quickstart PDF is short, and there is a version you can download for free off the Arcane Library, and you can also download it for free off DriveThru RPG, the website. So that means the game itself, if you want to play it, you don't have to spend any money. This is always a good sign for any tabletop role-playing game. Now, the thing is that, version 3 of D&D or 3.5, there's an SRD, right? It's available. 5e has an SRD, and it also is Creative Commons, and I believe the new version of D&D has a new SRD as well. 4e D&D does not, and I hate to say it, but AD&D and Basic and Originals also don't. Hopefully we'll see them go into Creative Commons or have their own SRD, but they don't. That's not a good thing. There are other games that are available that you can download for free. Lancer is one of those. You can get that for free. You can play that for free. You can download it. You don't have to spend any money. But if you want people to play a game, one of the barriers is, I don't know if I like this game. If I want to play this game, I don't want to have to spend any money to find out whether I like it. Let me play the game. If I like it, then I'll go back and pay money. And that tends to be how people, I think, operate. I find that's probably one of the better ways to operate. And this is one of the reasons why I like Shadowdark. The Quick Start guide has the basic rules in it. It has character creation. It has 4 classes that you can play, the 4 main classes. It has a few ancestries, which are basically just species, okay, or races, whatever you want to call it. It has 20 backgrounds that you can select or roll for. Rolling is a big thing in this game. There's equipment. There's some monsters to keep you going for a little while. Not all of them, but certainly a large chunk. And a Dungeon Master guide. And a short adventure. That's a really good Quick Start free PDF. Like, that gives you pretty much everything you need to get moving and decide whether you like this game. That's a big plus for me. Then you can go and get the single core rulebook, Shadowdark. Okay, this is digest size. It's a thick book. But what's in here? Like, it has everything you need to play. It has the core rules, which do not actually take hundreds of pages to get through. And it is actually quite short. I would not say that this is a super simple game, but it's still a complicated game. The player's handbook. This is the player's handbook. This is also the monster manual. There are over I'm going to tell you, there's bunches, like hundreds of monsters. It's also a Dungeon Master Guide, and it's actually a pretty good Dungeon Master Guide. What it doesn't have is an adventure. You can make that adventure. You can get them from somewhere else, and quite often you can get them for free. This is not the 3-book model that we've had from Dungeons and Dragons over the years. Like, okay, we're going to have one player's handbook, a monster manual, and a Dungeon Master Guide. Now, I understand if you're trying to give people more stuff, trying to cram all that information, particularly if it's not digest size, and we're dealing with something that's, I mean, this, you could say, well, the Rules Cyclopedia is the whole thing. That's A4, and that's how thick it is. That is the basic game, but that's not even really all the game, right? You can go up, and there are other expansions to that as well. Okay, so, but that's certainly bigger than the other one, right? If I had a choice and I had to make a decision about what I would play after playing quite a few different versions of D&D and other tabletop role-playing games, I was going to go with basic or BECMI Dungeons and Dragons, the Rules Cyclopedia. And then Shadowdark came along, and then I had to reevaluate my situation and what I was going to do, okay? So the physical and the PDF for the core rulebook is designed to actually be used by people. I'm not saying this is perfect layout, but it's pretty good. It has page references. It tells you where to go when you need to go and find something, particularly around character creation, which is really important to know where to flick to if it's not all in the one page or really close together. It has a ribbon as a bookmark, so I don't have to shove something in there. There's a bookmark already included. It's solid, okay? It is not going to fall apart. It's stitch bound. It's got a hard cover to it. It's going to last me years. Probably going to last me the rest of my life. Thank God for that, okay? It's got a solid contents page. Unfortunately, what it does not have, and annoys me a lot when I don't see them, is it does not have an index in this book. In the core rulebook, there's no index to help find specific information, which seriously is a problem more often than I would like. I would like to think that, okay, that's not going to be an issue, but I do find myself struggling to find stuff without having to flip through. I can't easily find stuff. I do have to actually search sometimes. The book is not small enough to exclude an index. You could say, well, some books do not need an index, but there's over 300 pages here. There's a lot of information here on everything. I think the rationale might be that, okay, the book is small enough, we don't need an index. I disagree. So if there's anything that they can do to improve this book, it's to put an index in there at the back so you can find stuff more quickly. There are certain things that will certainly help if you did that. Next, and look, most versions of Dungeons and Dragons tend to have a contents page and an index, but not every single book has ever done that. Like you can, yeah, like indexing has sort of had waves of we'll do it and then we won't do it, which is frustrating in a reference book. But this is not the first book to have made this mistake. Both the Quickstart guide and the core rule book are easy to read, right? Reading it and getting an understanding of how it works, understanding it. It has large text, maybe too big in some cases for some people, but my eyes are getting quite old, and I can still kind of read this late at night when I'm tired, okay? Glasses don't help my eyes at night, unfortunately. Once they get to a certain point, it doesn't matter. So the bigger the text, the better, right? So that helps actually process the information. The language is very clear. It's not perfect. There is some things that will occur that you'll read through and you're like, I'm a little bit confused about that. It has some remarkable formatting. It ensures basically that nothing is hidden in a wall of text. Like, even a wall of text is pretty easy to read. These are just tables. Those are just tables, right? But if I need information and I need to read them, it's all formatted in such a way that I can find what I'm looking for fairly quickly and not get lost. That's the sort of formatting we're talking about. Is there artwork in this book? Yes, there is, to break it up. But it's also an information book. I've also heard a lot of people say that Shadowdark RPG is a dungeon crawl tabletop role-playing game. It's a dark, horror-themed dungeon crawler. That's all it does. It doesn't do anything else. But it's not. It simply isn't. It can be applied to wilderness exploration. So you could do hex crawl. You could just do sandbox. That's not hard to do. I've done that already. In fact, the last Kickstarter for Shadowdark was all about exploring the wilderness and rules for hex crawl and for sandboxing. You can also do narrative fantasy scenarios. I've done that as well. It's not like it's stuck in one place. Does it do dungeon crawling well? Yes, some of it does. Other aspects I'm not so fond of, but I'll talk about them. So for me, this is just a cleaner version of a game that I love playing, really. It does everything it needs to do. It's all there, and it's nice and streamlined. Now, the dice rolling system is familiar. Why? Because we're rolling a 20-sided dice, right? You're rolling a dice that you've seen before. You've played Dungeons & Dragons. You know about 20-sided dice. You know about all of the other polyhedral dice that you're probably going to wind up using in Shadowdark as well. But in my opinion, I think based off the rolling system and the way it's structured, it is the simplest version I have ever seen or played, including basic D&D, because it only has 3 core dice mechanics. Even basic D&D had more than 3 core dice mechanics. Okay? And I would say that basic was probably the simplest out of all of the other versions of official Dungeons & Dragons. One of the easiest ones to pick up. And I've played that, and yeah, that would have been my go-to. Shadowdark has gone another step and simplified it again, made it much easier to understand. It's really simple to learn for a new player. Like, if you take that and you think, okay, I'm going to teach them 5e or any other version of D&D, much more complicated. I do a lot of teaching and explaining and demonstrations on games, and Shadowdark is much easier to teach somebody than any of the others that I come across, with the exception of something like a superhero game called Super Atomic, which you probably don't know very much about. Okay? Heck, even Fate. I've played Fate, and I would say that there are elements to Fate that are a little bit complicated, but it's very close to it. Yep, if you've ever played Fate, it's a very narrative game. Now, I would say when it comes to learning, new people learning, I'm not just talking about adults. I'm talking about children. My feeling is you don't need to be 12 years old to learn how to play this game. You could probably pick it up and be fine and be quite a lot younger than that, and you would be all right. And that is a good thing, not a bad thing. I know there's some people who feel like that's something that you don't want in a game, but the reality is that the more barriers, the more difficult you make a game to play, the less people play it, the more likely it will die off. The day will come when those of us who like playing basic D&D, AD&D, 3.5, 4e will die and be gone. As simple as that. So new people have to come into the hobby and play along with us, and they need to get that experience as well. So putting up barriers is a bad thing. And that's the reason that a game is simple to play is not because it's a bad game. It's not a dumbs down game. If anything, it sort of suggests to you that it has universal appeal and that it has the chance of standing the test of time, because complexity will always drive people away. Now, if you're a new game master or dungeon master, I've heard people say that the Shadowdark book assumes that you know a lot about Dungeons & Dragons, and that is actually true. There is a lot of information about the game of Dungeons & Dragons that is not in the Shadowdark book, that you would only understand if you had years and years of experience with other versions of D&D, and it doesn't always spell out all that stuff. Like things like monsters are stripped right down, okay? You're not always getting artwork for every single monster. You're not going to get all of the little bits and pieces that sort of help fit it all together sometimes. But in the long run, I still believe that a new game master or new dungeon master will find it easier to learn Shadowdark than to learn 5e. I do not think Shadowdark is just a game where those of you who have got frustrated with playing other D&D clones, or particularly 5e or 4e or 3.5, and decide, no, I want to play Shadowdark instead, I don't think it's the game that you transition from another version of D&D. And I think it's very much a game that if you've never played any kind of tabletop role-playing game, transitioning into this is actually probably going to be pretty easy. Okay? Whether you are a player or the game master or dungeon master. Kelsey focuses more on making a game that she loves. That really helps. She loves a game that helps new people play Dungeons and Dragons, and that is all Shadowdark is. It is just Dungeons and Dragons. And I think offering what 5e had said it would offer and failed to deliver. So for those of you who don't know, I was actually part of the play test for D&D Next and 5e, the 2014 version. My name is in the Monster Manual. And I was dealing with the beta test and the alpha play test, and I can assure you that I was not completely satisfied with the game. I felt like there was still too much crunch there and not enough elegance. Elegance is good in a game because it simplifies so much. Another thing that's really quite odd about this game, and I have a very low opinion of the ENnie Awards. ENworld puts on the ENnie Awards every year, right? And Shadowdark won a whole bunch of ENnie Awards. It won 4 of them, in fact, 4. Which is not impressive given that the ENnie Awards are voted on by basically anybody who wants to vote on them, whether they really deserve the award or not, and it's really about promoting and marketing. And if you can get enough people to get to vote for your product, really that's tends to wind up happening. You wind up getting the award. But I do feel like when Shadowdark won Product of the Year, it was well deserved. Best game, it was well deserved. Best layout and design, well deserved, except for that index. And then best rules. And I think, again, well deserved. Whereas in comparison, something like Book, which is a beautiful looking book, a simple rule system, and, a fun game to play, very dark, kind of like Shadowdark, I guess, maybe even darker. But God, I do not think that it deserved to have best layout and design. Okay? It's an art book. It is not easy to navigate at all. Much, much more difficult. So this is one of those times where I feel like any awards were deserved. It's not a one-shot game system. A lot of people keep saying, well, you can't play a long campaign with Shadowdark. It's only good if you're playing like a one or a short campaign, or one shot, 2 shot, maybe a 3 shot, something like that. You can run a long campaign with no issues in this game. I have run a campaign that goes from level 0 to level 9. We will get to level 10 too, okay? And there are other people who have completed long campaigns that go from level 0 right through to level 10. It can be done. It works fine. There's nothing wrong with them. So that's not true. That's a good sign. How many people can say that they can actually run a Dungeons and Dragons campaign from the lowest level to the top end of the level, and they finish it, complete it, and satisfied? I've done that for 5e. I've gone from level 1 to 20. I never could do it for 4e. There were 30 levels in that game. 3.5 never got to the top end. And I'm sure there are people who have, but you're smaller numbers. I see this game being one of those games where you can actually finish a campaign and play all the way to the top end. That is a good sign. Very rarely does that happen when you're looking at other versions of Dungeons and Dragons. Not unless you're playing for many years and you've got a very committed group that don't suffer problems as they play. Shadowdark RPG has a solo version of the game. So there's this game that you play with other people, right? But there's also a solo game that you can play on your own, which allows more people to play the game. Now you could say Basic kind of had something like that. There were adventures that you just play on your own, like the Basic adventure that you got for Begme. You play through that, and you could do that on your own. It was part of teaching you. But you actually have a solo version of the game you can play for Shadowdark. That is great. Not just a group game, but also a solo game for those people who just can't get people together. That's a really good sign again. Kelsey has actually created demonstration videos on how to play Shadowdark, whether it's actual play or explaining rules or showing you how to homebrew stuff for your game using Shadowdark. She's done classes, she's done monsters, okay? She hasn't done ancestries as far as I remember, and she hasn't done magic items, but I feel like those are probably the least problematic or difficult to deal with. Like you can probably do that with any system. It's, the process is going to be the same. But monsters and classes, usually very difficult in any system. The cover art of Shadowdark, the core rulebook, is super cool. Not being colored is not the problem. The issue of any art is it awesome? And that is awesome art. Now, what about all the other art inside? Well, that's a different story. Okay, I'm going to talk more about that because it's kind of, I feel like that discussion goes into when we start talking about monsters. Okay, character creation. One of the interesting things about character creation in Dungeons and Dragons is the process can take a long time. It can also be very confusing. It is also very easy to make mistakes. There's lots of numbers. There's lots of things to jot down. How do you make that process easier for somebody? Well, Shadowdark character creation is fast, it's simple, and easy compared to other versions of Dungeons and Dragons. It takes me between 5 and 15 minutes with pencil and paper, not some digital platform like D&D Beyond or any kind of other character builder online. I can't remember all of them right now off the top of my head. But that's sort of pencil and paper. You could probably do it even faster than that. I'm being quite generous in terms of my time frame. You'd be lucky if you could build a character that quickly for 5e, 4e, 3.5, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which I've never really successfully been able to do, and even basic. It took me a little while to get my head around how to build a character for basic. Now, it's a one-page fillable PDF. That's it. There is no multiple pages to contend with. There isn't a second page. There is just one page. So Shadowdark has one page. It's also available as a free fillable PDF, which means that that one page that you have to fill in can be done digitally, or you can do it with good old pencil and paper. Not a problem. There is a step-by-step approach to character creation. Not only does it give you a step-by-step instructions, which is about a quarter of a page, I believe, it gives you page references telling you which page to flick through when you're looking for the next thing you need to do, making it extremely easy to find what you need to assign. So when I do my ability scores or my stat scores or whatever you want to call them, they're essentially the same six that we're used to, strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. When I'm figuring out my scores, that's easy enough, okay? Piece of cake. I know where to go. When I need to determine what my ability modifiers are based off the ability scores, I know exactly where to go because it's page referenced. It tells me where to go from the section in the book that explains how to build a character. It tells me where to go to find my backgrounds. It tells me where to go to find my ancestries or my races and species. And it tells me where to go when I need to find the stuff about classes. And fortunately, there's only 4 classes to pick from in the core rule book, so that's easy enough to deal with. And each one is very short. It's like 1 page, 2 at the most. If I need to deal with my level, how to determine level, where to put it. Equipment, page reference, where do you go to find the equipment? This is the page. How to determine how much gold I have tells you exactly how to do it in the character creation rules on that quarter page. Okay, how to determine my attack bonus, that is also provided as well. Damage dice and spells, a little bit different. That's a little bit more difficult, but it still does give you a starting page to begin with, which is great. Awesome news. And like I said, you don't normally, you see a process in most Dungeons and Dragons games whatever version it is, that explains the process of building a character, but doing it in such a way that it's easy to navigate and find all that is really important. This book has probably done it the best way I've ever seen. I am always a firm believer in explain in the shortest amount of words and give me a page reference if I have to flick somewhere else. If I have to go somewhere else to find the rest of it, tell me which page I have to go to. That's what it does. The traditional 6 abilities for Dungeons & Dragons, as I said, strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, are all rolled down the line. What does that mean? That means you select 6, you have 6-sided dice, so you have 3 6-sided dice, 3 6-sided dice. You roll those for each of your ability scores. So if I roll a 2, a 6, and a 1, okay, 2, 6, and 1 is 9. That is my strength score. Then I do my next one, and I just keep doing that until I finish all of my ability scores. Then I can figure out what my modifier is because it tells me which page to turn to find that information. So when you roll like that, sometimes you'll get good numbers. Quite often you'll get bad numbers. But you can't build the same character every single time when you roll down the line. When you use a stat array or a point build system and you're not rolling your dice, you're always going to tend to find that the same character gets built every single time. Particularly if you're an optimizer, power gamer, a min-maxer. That's really not something you can do here. That means that the experience of playing the character that you have rolled up is going to be completely different to somebody else. And that is just starting with their numbers, okay? That's not the rest of it, because a lot of it you're going to be rolling randomly. There is no roll 4 dice and drop one of the dice and you take the best results. No, you stick with this. But there is a proviso. There is an optional rule that says if one of your ability scores is not at least a 14, it's an optional rule. You don't have to use it. Then re-roll all your stats. My group have had low numbers in the party, and they've also had extremely high numbers, rolling with 3 dice. And you just add them up, go down the line. So it can go both ways. It can be very swingy, but it definitely is an experience. This may not suit everybody, but I don't think it's about that. I think it's more about, let's take away the hours and hours. If you enjoy building characters, that's great. But let's, instead of spending hours building a character, let's spend hours playing the game. Backgrounds. Backgrounds are really, really concise. It's a single narrative sentence that a lot of people look at and assume that there's no mechanical benefit to that. But that's not true. It is assumed that if it's a simple task, so backgrounds, single narrative sentence for each background, 1 sentence, grants you advantage on any dice roll related to that background. So if you have to roll a dice, a 20-sided dice, you get to roll 2, and you get the highest result on that, 2 dice, okay? So that's a mechanical benefit. But the other thing is, you get automatic success if a task is simple that's related to your background. You don't have to roll dice. That's a good mechanic. That's really clean. It's the sort of thing that, frankly, almost every game should have, because you should not be rolling for stupid, silly things that aren't that important and don't have a significant effect on the experience. I love that. It is so clean. It is what 5e should have done. Frankly, I think a lot of people could learn a lot by just following that example. You can select your background, or you could roll randomly, and there are 20 options in the core rule book. And I think it's actually probably more fun to roll randomly than to select it. That way you are, again, you're getting an experience. You're not building the same character every single time. But you could do it either way. Ancestries, or species and races. When character creation comes up, usually there's a whole lot of different mechanical benefits. You get 1 mechanical benefit in Shadowdark and a couple of languages. Usually it's common in something else, okay? And you can choose between being a dwarf, an elf, a half-orc. Yes, they haven't got rid of the half-orc in Shadowdark. It still exists. You're not necessarily playing a full-blown orc. You can have a halfling. You can have a human. You could play as a goblin. I'm a little bit confused why there's goblin and no gnome, but so be it, there's goblin. She's mixing it up. One of the more interesting aspects of this whole process is it is not that complicated to figure out how your ancestry works. It's write it down, one word, and usually less than a sentence of instructions on how that mechanical benefit works. And it's very clear, which is great. Yep. Official classes, very limited again. As I said, only 4 in the core rule book. And you get the wizard, so you can cast magic. Okay, it's cast spells. The thief or rogue, it's called the thief. So you can do sneaky, experty stuff. What thieves do. You could be a priest or the cleric, cast divine magic. Or you can be a fighter. So you're an expert in weapons and fighting. That's the purpose. Now, you'll be thinking, well, hang on, Fred, that's not very much. This is just the core rule book. There are other things out there that allow you to expand on this. One of the other things that I really like about this game is this game understands the importance of darkness. No player characters can see in the dark. Only monsters see in the dark. Only monsters that are dark adapted see in the dark. You could have a monster that isn't dark adapted, but only monsters will ever be seeing in the dark. Players that are playing a character never see in the dark because they don't spend all their time in the dark. They are not dark adapted. They have to carry a light source of some sort, whether that be a torch, a lantern, a lamp, it doesn't matter. It makes darkness unknown. You don't know what's in the darkness because you can't see into it. It makes the darkness scary. You remember as a kid and you're walking through the dark and you were scared because you didn't know what was in the darkness. It could be an angry dog. Your imagination is going wild. It could be a monster with tentacles and big teeth. It could be the alien that you just watched in the movie and you're like, I don't want to walk into that thing. It could be anything. And in a world where there are monsters and the monsters live in the dark and you can't see in the dark, the light is so important. It's one of the truest things about the dark. When you look at horror movies, they use the dark all the time because they know that darkness creates fear. Fear of the unknown because you can't see everything. Something could be hiding there. Might not be anything. So darkness is a really important aspect to Shadowdark, something that has been lost from Dungeons & Dragons over the years. And I'm so glad to see it coming back into this game, which is a modern game. Cursed Scrolls. These are magazine series that put out by Arcane Library or Kelsey. There's third-party publishers have created so many different classes and ancestries to try out, including myself. Like, so if you were worried, I don't want to have just a few ancestries and just 4 classes and just a couple of backgrounds. No, you don't have to worry about that. There's so many people publishing stuff. Myself, I've done 10 classes for Shadowdark, 17 ancestries. You could play whatever you like. You could use some of those 10 or none of them. It's there. And they're actually really easy to make. They're not as hard as other versions of D&D, significantly easier. So that means you could just make a new class or ancestry if you needed to, if there's something missing. Every class has between 2 and 4 different features that separates them from everything else that another class does. And the great thing about the classes is they don't stand on each other's toes. And that's one of the important things to do when you're creating classes, right? Usually a spellcaster has 2 features. They can cast spells and they can do something else. If you are like a thief or a fighter, like a martial of some kind or expert, really you're going to probably have about 4 different features because you're not casting spells. So that's a nice way. It's a really clean, clear way of designing a class. And if it was not obvious, that is how it works. Because equipment uses a simple slot system, you do not have to count pounds or kilos or weight. It's easy to track for players. It has an impact on the game. This was something that we got rid of out of the game. Why did we get rid of it out of the game? Because counting up weight is not that much fun. But if you tell somebody the number of things you can count, you can carry is 10 slots, so every piece of equipment is kind of like a slot. Most bits of gear is 1 slot. Some can be 2, sometimes 3. It's very rare to see a 3, but most of them are going to be 1 slot. You get a number of items equal to 10 or something that's equal to your strength stat. So if your strength score is an 18, you can carry 18 things. If your strength is 8 and you've got either 10 slots or you get your strength score, which is 8. You take the higher one, so you take 10. Okay, so you've got 10 or more. That's usually how it's always going to work, depending on what your strength score is. That is very easy to do. So what should I carry? I can't carry everything. I have to make hard choices. Yep. And it solves the problem of characters carrying equipment as a system by using a slot system. There's no need to count up weight, as I said. It doesn't matter if you understand imperial or metric, which is great because I don't use imperial. I understand metric more than I do imperial. I'm in New Zealand. I'm not American, and I'm not from the UK. Okay, I think even the UK is using metric now. So the reality is there is a huge benefit to simplifying the carrying aspect of resource management. So aspects that were considered to be difficult are actually being made a lot easier in this game. People will always attempt to break the equipment system. I found this was the case with my group, and I've heard it from other people. So carrying bags, pack animals, there's always somebody who says, well, if I have another bag, can I carry more stuff? No, it doesn't work that way. You get a pack, it doesn't take up a gear slot, but it doesn't increase your ability to carry more stuff. Okay, you get a certain number of gear slots, that's it. Your pack animal would increase your carrying capacity, not your carrying capacity, but I suggest targeting wagons, pack animals, and just stomping that sort of stuff out. Because, again, as I've said, players will try to take away or design out or force out the challenge and fun of a game. And this has actually made it really simple to actually include this into a game. And normally resource management, like carrying stuff, is not a big factor. I have been surprised how important it has become in the game and how much my group are starting to realize the benefits of having a home base and making decisions about who should be carrying what. And those don't actually take that much time. Surprisingly, it can take less than a minute. Less than a minute. Character advancement is determined by treasure collection, not killing monsters. So you don't get experience points or advance by killing monsters. No, you have to collect treasure. Or you have to complete objectives. So now gold and treasure collecting is more important to a player than killing the monster. That means I don't have to kill the monster to get the experience. I could employ some unusual or bizarre tactic to get that treasure and never ever have to deal with the monster. Now you might be saying, that's not fun. No, it can be a lot of fun. You can steal it off the monster. You can trick the monster. Heck, you might even be able to go completely around the monster. There are so many different ways that it could potentially be done. You could engage the monster, steal the treasure, and then just run away and take the treasure with you, provided you can carry it all. Okay, there are lots of different things you can do, and that's just a few of them. And I really like a game that opens up the opportunities and possibilities for players rather than employing the same tactic. Kill something, take its shit. Okay? Skip the kill something and just take its shit instead. Great idea. Shadowdark, well done. There are very few character options and customization compared to something like modern Dungeons and Dragons. So because of this, you get less paralysis or problems when people are making choices during play about what they will do with their character and during character creation, because it's much less likely. There isn't a lot of customization going on. There isn't a lot of options Okay, we're not looking at bucket loads of feats. There's not subclassing. There's no multi-classing in the game. Those things don't exist. So what happens is this means that Shadowdark is not completely, but I would say mostly immune to power gaming behavior. Now, most of my home group are power gamers. They engage in that sort of thing all the time. It's one of their favorite things to engage in. So why are they interested in playing this game? Because it's a good game. It works. Because characters' numerical values are generated randomly and you don't get to choose where they go, you have to play with what you've got. So it's about using your brain and deciding, okay, given that I've got these resources, how can I best use them? It also means that your advancement, your character advancement is also very much random. You don't necessarily get the thing that you want. You're rolling randomly with 2 6-sided dice on a talent chart when you're leveling up to determine what you're going to get. When you get your hit points, you roll to see how many hit points you get. You're not taking the average, you're not taking the maximum value. So you could wind up with a lot of hit points or very few. So there's a lot to be said for a game which leans more into less customization options and instead separating those things out. You can go to third-party publishers and you can get lots of different classes and ancestries and backgrounds and combine them and you'll be fine. But within the class, within the ancestry, we're not getting into the weeds because you really can't test for feats, multi-classing. And I mean, most of the time, this is why older versions of multi-classing were so restrictive because they knew that it was going to break the game. And I like the fact that it makes the game kind of immune to power gaming where people are just trying to optimize for combat. What I did notice is that the fighter class, out of all of the 4 core classes, could gain insane armor class. If you wind up rolling the same feat that gives you a bonus to your armor class every single time, and you're stacking it on the same type of armor, you could wind up with over a 20 on your armor class. It's possible to do so, depending on what the armor is that you're wearing, even if it's not magical armor. You could also get some very insane numbers on your attack bonus or your damage bonus with a fighter. Just, as I said, by rolling the same talent every single time with the same character, and it just happens to be the same talent when you're advancing. So clearly, that would break the bound accuracy that Shadowdark is trying to achieve, making the fighter quite overpowered. This did happen. It's one of the things that I did notice. Is it worse or more of a problem compared to other versions of D&D? I would say it is. At this point, I would say it's not as big a problem as other versions of Dungeons & Dragons because there is still a top end, even if you keep rolling really well in the same thing for your armor class or your attack bonus or damage bonus. Okay, there is still going to be a top end that you can reach. It's possible to have narrative character development that players can build on in Shadowdark. It is not like you'll never have that opportunity, that it's just a throwaway character and you just need to have a folder full of different characters. The reality is that my group has played from level 0 to level 9. I have thrown everything under the sun at them and they are not dead. No one's died. They've been close many times. Those vampires messed them up bad. The mimic, oh my gosh, are they terrified of mimics. There's been a few cases where things have gone really badly, but they still make it out. They're skilled individuals, they're not new people, but the reality is that, there is a possibility of having a narrative flow to your game. Believe it or not. There's no guarantees it will happen, but it is possible. The game rules don't limit people to performing a task. By having too many crunchy rules, you actually remove your options for what you can do unless you have that specialized feature, specialized rule in your on your character sheet, a special feat, or whatever else the heck it is that you're dealing with. And Shadowdark does not restrict performing tasks and activities in the game because it doesn't have that subclass, multi-classing feat and various other things going on. It doesn't even have skills. There's no skill system in Shadowdark. We're just using ability checks. Will there ever be multi-classing in the rules for Shadowdark? And I think the answer is no, because actually recently I was talking to one of the members in my group, and we were discussing the problem of multi-classing and incorporating it into Shadowdark. Because you can never test every single combination that people will come up with if they are mixing and matching different classes, particularly if most of the abilities are front-loaded. And in Shadowdark, everything is front-loaded, because whatever you get straight away, except for spell casting. Certain spells you have to wait till you're a certain level. But anything else, you get it straight away. You don't have to wait till you're level 10 or level 5 or level 2 or level 3. You're getting it all up front. So multi-classing would make no sense in that case. It's actually easier to go and simply make a completely new class to sort of capture what you're trying to achieve. That is actually probably the best way to approach it. Multi-classing is not needed in this game, just because the classes are actually not that difficult to build. The biggest complaint about Shadowdark is the lack of customization for classes, which is correct, but again, like I said, it doesn't need it, because you could just make another class. I think the problem is with this rationale in terms of you don't have enough customization is really simply returning to that power gaming behavior and the desire to find a loophole and break the game. And if I can't find a loophole and break the game, and that's where I get my enjoyment from, then I don't like this game. And if that's not the game for you, then go play a game that allows you to break the rules so that you can feel good about yourself. Shadowdark really doesn't allow that to happen. And it's been done deliberately. Players will always, as I said, seek a way of removing challenge and fun from the game if you let them. And sometimes you need to design a game for what is best for everybody at the table, the game master or dungeon master, and for them, not just one aspect of it or one individual. Now, for those of you who are saying, I don't want to build my character using pencil and paper, that is just old. I'm so attached to the online character builders, whether it's D&D Beyond or anything else. It's all right, because guess what? Shadowdark has an online character builder. This online character builder is free. You do not have to spend a cent. You register, I think it is. Heck, I think people have made characters without even registering. You can get to it. It's called Shadowdarklings. It takes 30 seconds to randomly roll up a character. If you want to build your character and make some choices, because there are some choices to make, right? It'll automatically roll your stats, your ability scores, but you can choose what class you're going to be, your ancestry, your background. You can choose your equipment. That can all be done, and it will take you 30 seconds. It's really fast. If it doesn't take you 30 seconds, you'll have to take a couple of minutes. But you're not looking at 15 minutes or an hour or anything like that. It's one of the fastest character building options I've seen out there, even with the customization aspect. Okay, Shadowdark core rules. This is where I think one of the greatest strengths in this game exists. You know that a game is good when the core rules are really solid. And what Shadowdark does, it does well. There are 3 core dice mechanics in the game. There is the stat check, or basically the ability check, the six that you have available: strength, dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, okay, and wisdom, intelligence, wisdom, blah, 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 constitution. You got all those. You got your attack roll, whether that's a ranged attack or a melee attack where you're up close with a sword or you're firing a bow. It's an attack roll. That's the next one. The last one is spell casting. There's a spell casting check. They don't use skill checks. That's what a stat check is, or ability check is. They don't use saving throws. They don't use anything else, just those 3. That's it. Rather than almost every single version of Dungeons & Dragons has had at least 4 to 5 different key dice mechanics, whether it's an old version of D&D or a modern version. Old or modern, there's usually been at least 4 or 5. Like something like basic, which I consider to probably have one of the more complicated core rules, even though classes and races are far more simpler compared to a lot of the other games that you could play that are D&D based, right? Even, Rules Cyclopedia. What do we have? We have an ability check. You roll equal to or lower than your ability score. Then you make an attack roll. That's a different mechanic. You roll a 20-sided dice for that. You roll equal to or greater than whatever the number is when you look on a chart to hit. Or you could use THAC0, right? Which is essentially kind of the same. You have a saving throw. How does a saving throw work? Oh my gosh, I have to roll equal to or greater than. Are you kidding? So we're going up and down and up and down and up and down. And then what if I get to the thief? There are percentile dice checks during gameplay for a thief. If I am a cleric and I'm casting, turn undead, I roll 2 6-sided dice now. And I'm rolling equal to or greater than. Oh my gosh. I love basic, and I've got the Rules Cyclopedia, but every single dice mechanic that any tabletop role-playing game has got has come from that game. It's got every single one of them all included as core rules. That's some crazy stuff, right? So this is why I like the idea that Shadowdark just has 3. You roll equal to or higher than, that is it. There is a rolling process for a target number, as I said, equal to or higher, so the mechanic is consistent right across. It's intuitive. It allows for interesting character development, so you can actually increase your character's development. Its power, its numbers, those things can happen. Not going to happen for everything, but it certainly is possible. It also allows you to improve the monster's difficulty by having a system like that, and it's easy to apply. Something like difficulty class or target numbers. That's basically what it is. DC, difficulty class, target numbers, has a scale. Easy is a 9. It's okay, so I get 9 or more. Normal is 12, hard is 15, and extreme is 18. And there's no point going beyond 18 because you don't need to. Anything beyond an 18 is impossible to achieve. Anything less than a 9 probably is a waste of your time. Why are you rolling those? Why are you setting those numbers? 9 is easy. Like, you don't need to go lower than that. This has proven to be mechanically useful at low level and high level of play. I found that numbering system, and because not every single number that the player characters has is constantly increasing, we don't have to worry about continually increasing those DCs. Those DCs can be there and they're all right. So this is one of the problems that a lot of versions of D&D have suffered from, is the fact that because everything is increasing based off their level, when as soon as you do that, when 5e proficiency bonuses really have bloated the numbers, made it really difficult. 4e did the same thing. 3.5 did exactly the same thing. It's not a good place to be. So I love Shadowdark for doing that. It definitely seems to be working. Ability checks, skill checks, and saving throws, as I said, have been condensed down to what is called the stat check for strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Modern Dungeons and Dragons has separated them out. Like we used to have ability checks, then they brought in skills, and we've always had saving throws. But really, saving throws, ability checks, and skill checks are essentially the same thing. They're based off the same numbers in many respects. You might be adding something else to it, but why did you even have to add that to that in the first place? Was it really that necessary to do so? So I like the fact that Kelsey has looked at this and said, okay, I don't have to have a saving throw or a skill check or an ability check. I can just have the ability check, and I'll call it the stat check. That is really smart. I wish modern Dungeons and Dragons had implemented this change. They haven't. but it's so simple to adjudicate. It is so simple for players to deal with. The game uses advantage for benefits. If you have, advantage, instead of rolling 1 20-sided dice, you roll 2, you take the highest result. Okay? Disadvantage is penalties. Your penalty is not adding a +1, +2, deduct. It's not -1, -2, -3. It's take 2 dice, roll both of them, take the lowest result. It's a very simple process. It means you're adding up less numbers. You take whatever's on the dice and you add it to whatever your modifier is. Dice roll, modifier, end of story, move on. When you're using any kind of dice mechanic. So, and you could apply advantage and disadvantage, not just to 20-sided dice rolls, but you could apply it to a damage roll or any other dice roll that isn't a 20-sided dice roll if you really wanted to. It's really easy to use and it's simple to remember. And that is a really important aspect. One of the things that really frustrates me is 5e was using so much Shadowdark, disadvantage and advantage, but not all their dice mechanics were leaning onto advantage and disadvantage. Sometimes we were using numbers. We were adding and subtracting stuff. Are you kidding me? Now, the reason that Shadowdark also really appeals to me is flatter mathematics. It means that it actually promises partial bound accuracy. 5e never achieved bound accuracy because it was too easy for the players to move their numbers around. The monsters' numbers never moved unless the Dungeon Master modified the stat block. But this game here, you could change your attack bonus easily. There were so many different ways to do it. Your armor class, your skill bonuses, your saving throw bonuses. There were so many different ways. That's really not what Shadowdark is trying to do. It's not opening that up. And that means that you don't have to constantly be worrying about the numbers getting bigger. So the maths is a lot easier when the numbers are smaller. My area of expertise is psychology, mathematics, and philosophy. Okay? And I've got a bit of counseling training, mental health, drug addiction, all that sort of stuff. And I can assure you that bound accuracy is probably never fully achievable, but Shadowdark, if any game has got partway there, Shadowdark is pretty close. Not perfect, but pretty close. How did Shadowdark achieve bound accuracy? And I kind of pointed to this by not adding modifiers to damage. So when you do damage, you just roll a dice for your damage. Whether it's spells or it's a weapon, you just roll the dice. You don't add dexterity modifiers or strength modifiers to it. That's not a normal process. You just roll a dice. Okay? That makes a huge difference by not allowing that to take place, by not having constantly new modifiers related to those things. Because now you know, okay, if I want to do more damage and I'm using strength and I'm adding it to my damage dice, I want my strength modifier to be as high as possible. Well, it doesn't matter in Shadowdark because you're just rolling that dice. Hit points beyond first level. You only get your constitution modifier once at first level. Same with monsters, same with player characters. You're not getting it at every single level. So it means the number of hit dice you get, which is basically just a timer, will always be quite small. We're not going to see things that have 100 hit points. It's not going to happen, even at high level. Nothing's got 100 hit points. This game has got a lot less going on. And one of the huge benefits that Shadowdark has is it doesn't use base attack or base bonuses or proficiency bonuses like 5e that scale with the character, that you would add to absolutely everything as you level up. That doesn't happen. Now, I know a lot of people have said, well, that doesn't make any sense. As your character levels up, you should get better at everything. That's not true. I've been involved in the martial arts for years. I don't do very much of it nowadays because I'm getting old and fat and slow. But the reality is that you don't get really that much faster. There's a certain point where your ability to get quicker and move faster is not going to improve. So you can't just keep infinitely increasing your dexterity. There is a limit to how strong you can get. Your body has sort of a point where it can't go any further. Now you can say, well, there's magic in the world. It's fantasy, Fred. Should be able to have no limit. No, there's still limits. There's still going to be limits. There's still limits. And, Shadowdark is one of those games where, just like 5e is supposed to have a cap of 20 for your ability ab score, I believe it is an 18. I believe it is an 18 in Shadowdark. It's either that or a 20. I don't think you can get much far higher than that. It doesn't allow you to go any further than that. I think the only way you could do that is if you had a magic item that allowed you to push it higher than that. Otherwise, it's not going to happen that way. I think that is a really smart way to look at how this should work. I'm really pleased that things sort of top out. An 18, you're not going to get any better. 18 and plus, your modifier doesn't get any better. Just you get a plus 4. You can either have a -4 or a +4. That's it. That's your limit for your player characters. That makes a huge difference. I think logically it makes more sense for a character that they don't have everything leveling up and improving every time they gain a new level. Some things will improve and some things won't, and that is all right. And this is something that I think modern D&D needs to learn from. It certainly it applied to some versions of D&D, but not all of them. A lot of them tended to have everything leveling up. That's probably a mistake, in my opinion, because you don't get better at fighting infinitely. There is a cutoff point. I don't consider any game system to be able to take a low-level monster with low-level monster numbers to be a threat to high-level characters, even if you have bound accuracy, because mathematics doesn't work that way. Big numbers are going to beat small numbers in a system where you have to roll equal to or greater than. Shadowdark doesn't try to do the impossible. It doesn't expect low-level monsters to still be a threat to high-level characters. Something that I know that they tried to achieve with 5e, and I don't think that it really ever applied to basic D&D or AD&D. They couldn't care less about that sort of thing. I know that they certainly were leaning into that in 4e, and 3.5 was never really very successful, so they always sort of built monsters for the level that you're fighting, right? I don't think it's a fair thing to expect small numbers to be able to beat big numbers. It doesn't work that way. That's irrational. Shadowdark states that a natural 20. So when you roll a natural 20 when you're playing this game, you've said, I need you to make a dice roll. If you roll a 20, you succeed. You don't fail. It doesn't matter what you add to this dice. This is not about making an attack roll. This could be a stat check. This could be a spell casting check. You roll a 20, you're going to succeed. That's it. And if you roll a natural 1, so in other words, you roll a 1 on the 20-sided dice, and you are asked to roll a dice for either an attack roll, a stat check, or a spell casting check, you will fail. That is going to fail. There's no getting away from it. Okay? This is great thinking. Do you know why? Because if you can't actually fail when you roll a dice, there's something wrong with the way you're thinking about the dice. I think this is the future of Dungeons & Dragons game mechanics, when the wider community knows what they're talking about and they actually understand the whole process. Right now, I think the wider community in Dungeons & Dragons, modern D&D, a lot of people have not played long enough and understand that if you require a dice roll, there has to be a chance of either failure or success. Otherwise, stop asking them to roll a dice. And one of the great things about Shadowdark is it actually spells out and says, you don't have to roll dice for everything. There's a lot of things that people can do and they will automatically succeed, or maybe automatically fail, because it's impossible. It can't be done. Doesn't matter how good your dice roll is. Okay? It is not up to the player to decide if you roll dice. It is up to the game master or dungeon master. So if the game master says, no, you're not rolling dice for this, don't keep pushing it. And Shadowdark is one of those things that really sort of leans into that. Because if you have to roll dice and there is no chance to succeed or fail in Shadowdark, then why was the point in rolling the dice in the first place? Other than to be a dick and say, yeah, 20's not good enough, mate. Sorry. And I'm like, well, hang on, I can't roll higher than a 20, so why am I rolling the dice in the first place? So this is why I like this dice mechanic. I honestly, years from now, when I'm well and truly dead and gone, I guarantee it, this will be a dice mechanic that will be adopted. It's going to come. It might take a little while for people to accept it, but it's coming. It is the future. What I love about this is when you have a situation where rolling a dice when you do roll dice, you could succeed or fail, but the fact that you don't have to roll dice to succeed and fail, where your decisions might be good enough that they automatically succeed or automatically fail, it means that players will think of actions that allow them to automatically succeed. They will create plans that are rock solid, that make sense they should work, and not require a dice roll. So decisions and character actions are not completely at the whim of a random dice roll. And decisions and character actions should not be completely at the whim of a dice roll. That's just flipping a coin now. It's about problem solving and using skill and thinking things out. And I think that is a good thing to have. And the more that we have people coming up with really good ideas that are focusing on the player action and clever ideas, having specific training, which means you won't have to roll the dice or contend with having a high modifier. I have a rope. It's hooked up. Why would you need to roll dice if you have a rope that's hooked up? Just climb the rope. It's done. I'm searching for something in a specific area, underneath the bed. Why are you rolling dice to look underneath the bed? It's a silly thing to be doing. The team gets together. Instead of one of us trying to move this enormous boulder, okay, it's really heavy. Why don't we all move the boulder together? We're going to succeed. I think that is a really good thing to see. And I like that Shadowdark embraces this concept. Shadowdark game is resistant to most Dungeons and Dragons murder hoboing and the kind of behavior around just going around and butchering everything, because killing doesn't get you the rewards or experience points and level you up. As I said, it's treasure. So that is a great thing. The torch timer. There's been a lot of comments about the torch timer and how the torch timer is a good thing or a bad thing. One of the really interesting things about the torch timer is it's not the first time it's ever been used. Shadowdark is not the first one to come up with the torch timer. There are other games that have done that as well. Okay? It's been around. In fact, it goes right back to Dungeons and Dragons. Real-time tracking for a torch timer was a thing. And then abstract concepts of tracking time were also a thing. So the torch timer is the smartest application of a burning torch in dungeon exploration when it's dark that I have seen, because you're using real time. Okay? A torch lasts 1 hour. Start your timer, Game Master or Dungeon Master. That doesn't stop the players from doing the same thing, by the way. Rather than using abstract time, when a Dungeon Master uses abstract time, they have to contrive what the time is like and then describe and communicate that to players. But players get confused with abstract time periods because they can't see inside the Game Master's head. But you eliminate that problem, particularly when you are delving around in a dark location and on an adventure with a torch timer itself, where if the torch goes out and it gets dark and you can't see, the monsters are going to come. That solves a lot of problems because there's no arguments about how long the torch timer is, because it's an hour. You just start the stopwatch or look at the clock and you can tell exactly what it is. There is no argument to be had, which is why I like the torch timer a lot. Torch timers Also stop procrastinating player decisions. Like, those players that just will not make a decision, or slow play styles. It speeds everything up. I've noticed this has done that for my group. They play a lot faster. They will not muck around. They don't go and rest every single time to get every single thing back, with the fear that if they leave it too long, if they leave something too long, they're going to run out of torches, they're going to run out of lamp oil, or something in the adventure will change and they will miss out on what they could get. So they are pushing. They're pushing themselves, and of course they will bug out when they feel like they have to bug out. But they are pushing rather than saying, after every single fight, I'm going to go and take a rest and get everything back. Because again, Shadowdark doesn't work like that. A lot of your resources don't burn out like that. You're not going to run out of swings of your sword or your weapon. You're not going to run out of daggers to stab people with, because you just stab it with the same dagger. You're not going to really, quite often you don't run out of spells that often in Shadowdark either. So you can keep pushing yourself. I like the fact that it's there. And torch timers, believe it or not, the torch timer doesn't always have to be used. It doesn't have to be used for every single adventure. You only use the torch timer when it makes sense. And the rulebook actually states this. And it talks about the torch timer, when to use the torch timer. It talks about abstract time and how to modify time, and and some of the contriving natures of applying time to your game to make it flow so that everybody's having a good time, you and the players, right? So that's all there. So it's not just time is just the torch timer. That is not true at all. It has its place. And in the darkness, in a dungeon, in a cave, it has a place. But if it's midday, if it's midday and the sun is out and you're in the middle of a village and you're exploring a village, you don't need a torch timer. Why would you bother? If you're journeying along the road, you don't need a torch timer. Why would you need that? The sun is out. You can see what's going on. People have stated a few reasons why they don't like the torch timer, and I think the rationale has never been objective. I think the problem is that some people are they find it hard to mentally shift away from the game master using abstract time over real time. But again, Shadowdark does use abstract time. It just doesn't use abstract time all the time. It uses real time when it would be most appropriate to use real time, which I think is smart. I've also found a few people that I've played with that that basically want to get the game master to apply retrospective actions for their character a lot. Something comes up and they say, oh, well, I would have probably bought that at the store and that was like an hour ago. And like, hang on, you never said that you had that. Is it on your character sheet? No, but I would have done that. I was probably, it didn't say they were being quiet and sneaky and trying to avoid being seen. But I would have been sneaky, so I should be able to, retrospectively, we should be able to go back and just count that I had that. Like the tendency for players to say, I want to retrospectively go back and have my character do something that they didn't actually state they wanted to do is a problem. Because Shadowdark is one of those games where the game master will answer questions but not provide a lot of information. The players have to actually ask the question and state what they are doing. They have to actively make decisions and communicate that, because humans are not yet telepathic. Okay? It doesn't work well when you're using real time. Retrospective actions don't work well. And I think that's one of the other reasons why people don't like that, is because they can't do that retrospective. I have seen people try to undermine the use of torches by trying to make them for free. Oh, I'm going to just get a tree branch. I've run out of torches. I'm just going to get a tree branch. I'm going to rip off a piece of cloth for the infinite, an infinite number of times of the clothing that I'm wearing, wrap it around there, put a tiny little bit of oil on there for my oil flask, and then I'll burn that for an hour. That's not the same thing. Okay? So they don't want to have to carry torches or carry lamp oil. This is something that I've come across. I've even seen people who will undermine the torch timer, whether the game master is keeping track of the time, or the players that are keeping track of the time, they will try to sort of eliminate that and start putting forward an argument to say, well, why are we using a torch timer in this case? Because this wasn't actually my character playing the game. This was me just asking a question. It's all part and parcel of the whole process. So yes, it will happen. And I don't think there are good reasons for it to happen, because there's no need to, because the motives behind them are usually not good. The other thing is, like, when a torch timer starts, the game master starts their timer, looks at their clock, determines when the torch will go out, or the lamp will go out, or lantern. But the players can do the same thing. And my players in my group have been doing that. One of them will always turn on a timer to track the torch timer, particularly if they aren't carrying the torch and somebody else is. So there is no confusion. There's no arguments to be had, because both parties, players and game master or dungeon master, are tracking time at the same time. So that's the torch timer for me. Now, I know I've heard, I think AJ Pickett has said, look, one of the things I don't like about the torch timer is that it could potentially punish people who are new to the game, who aren't familiar with how to play the game. And that might be the case when you're starting off, but I would say after the first session or second session, it's probably not going to be an issue, because the rules are so streamlined and so simple. And I'm not going to say they are as simple as they could be, because that's not true. But the reality is, like, picking up Shadowdark is not that difficult to do, even for a youngster, even for a child. I would imagine you wouldn't find it too difficult to get the likes of a 5 or 6 year old to play Shadowdark without too much trouble. They'll probably manage. Crawling rounds. Now, crawling rounds is where everybody takes their turn, even when they're out of combat. So whether you're having combat or not, everybody goes around and takes a turn. And one of the reasons for allowing crawling, which basically means you roll initiative at the very beginning of your session, and you follow the, whoever rolls the highest goes first, and you pick a direction, clockwise, anti-clockwise, really doesn't matter, and you just go around in that direction until everybody takes a turn, has their turn. The reason behind the crawling round is to allow everybody to share the spotlight, so nobody gets left behind. But the great thing about crawling rounds in Shadowdark is it's easy to ignore. It's not always necessary to have crawling rounds, if you ask me, if you don't want to use crawling rounds. I don't personally like crawling rounds, because I play with adults. I expect them to behave like adults. I'm not playing with kids necessarily, where they might be fighting about who's going to go first or second or whatever else. And so, following an order with, very young kids may make it easier. I find it slows down the game using crawling rounds. It also, I find, using crawling rounds turns the game into a board game, because you find out that people want a map laid out so they can place tokens or miniatures out and move them around to position where they're going to go, and they tell you what they're going to do. It feels too much like a board game to me, and that's not what I feel like Shadowdark is. The other thing is, when you have turns every single time, even outside of combat, there are possibilities that you're going to get a player who's it's got a different style of operating. They're more of a watcher. They have a watcher style. So players engaging in paralysis occurs when people have a watcher style, or they don't have something to say every single round. Like, they don't need to, I don't need to say, look, whatever I was doing before, I was walking along with the rest of the group. I didn't need to say anything else until something comes up. And so I find that player paralysis can occur for some people in my group, and maybe in other groups as well, if you wind up using crawling rounds. And I find the game plays perfectly fine without using crawling rounds. Also, the other reason why I don't like crawling rounds that much, but I see why it would be used in certain circumstances, is it results in the wrong person speaking quite often and not moving the adventure forward. Sometimes the right person to speak is the person who has thought about what needs to happen next. and what the party needs to do. And as soon as they speak, the rest will be on board. Or at least some of them will be on board. Or there's at least a discussion taking place. Whereas if you start putting forward and saying everybody is going to feed into what they should do next, some people are just waiting for somebody else to provide the answer. And that's all right. There's nothing wrong with that kind of style of play. But you need to leave it open so they can do that. Now you could say, well, if you have nothing you want to specifically do, I pass. I guess you could do it that way. Again, I don't think it's necessary. I see why crawling rounds exist. I feel like it is designed for strangers, children who have struggled taking turns, and people who don't know how to share the spotlight. So for me, it's an optional rule as far as I'm concerned. And I think it almost says as such in the rule book as well. Next, luck tokens. Luck tokens are a contentious topic, I'll tell you that. My group have been playing with luck tokens and we've come to a couple of conclusions. It is an optional rule. You do not have to use them. It is most like the Dungeons & Dragons 5e inspiration, where you get advantage on a 20-sided dice roll that you can use or anyone in your party could use. That's kind of basically how it works. How you get luck tokens is really completely up to the Dungeon Master, which I love. I think it should have always been that way. Don't stipulate how they get luck tokens so the players are sort of, okay, I'll keep performing that behavior to press the button to get myself another luck token. No, that's not a good way to play the game. What I've discovered is if you incorporate too many luck tokens, your game will get messy and certain behaviors will start to occur. And these are some of the things that I've noticed when we were using luck tokens. The players really need luck tokens sometimes. Their player characters really do need them because their numbers are so small and they're rolling a 20-sided dice. Sometimes they really need to have that benefit. Even though the numbers they're trying to hit, get equal to or greater than, aren't that big, they often do need them. But they also can be a problem. And one of the problems that I've come across is that they stop using their luck tokens and they save their luck tokens so that when somebody fails a spellcasting check, that spellcasting check can be re-rolled. Which I don't have a problem with, but if you have too many luck tokens, like if you have 5 people in your group and everybody has a luck token and somebody's casting Cure Wounds and they fail, there's no way they want that Cure Wounds to be lost for a day. So they're going to use all their luck tokens till it succeeds. Okay? And not only that, every time it comes up, even if you only allow 1 reroll, that certainly increases the chances that the spells aren't lost. And what it does is it's clear to me now that we're level 9. Eventually what it does is by allowing too many luck tokens into your game, and because they will stockpile them for spellcasting checks, it turns the wizard and the priest into the most powerful classes in the game because they cast spells. And their spells are really strong. They are very weak to begin with, but they get stronger and stronger and stronger, and very quickly too. So don't use a lot of luck tokens in your game. It would be my advice. I've had plenty of experience now, and we've come to the conclusion that there is a drawback to including too many. So you have to be very careful about how many you allow into the game so that behavior doesn't become a thing. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's different if you've only got 1 luck token in the group and somebody fails that Cure Wounds spell, the spellcasting check for the Cure Wounds. That doesn't change the fact that they probably use that luck token to re-roll it. That's not the problem. It's if they can do that every time somebody fails the Cure Wounds spellcasting check. Then that's a problem. You know what I mean? Okay, next. Another thing that I noticed was dialogue and social interactions are resolved by talking to people in Shadowdark. So if there is something that requires talking with an NPC or a monster between the player characters, you just talk to each other, player to dungeon master. Great thing to be doing, right? This is a tabletop role-playing game. Role-playing games aren't just about rolling dice. They're about portraying and being a character playing a role. You're playing a role like you did as a kid, right? Rather than just rolling a charisma check. And I think that is more fun to simply use dialogue rather than roll dice. It is much more meaningful for a group and much more meaningful to any role-playing game, in my opinion. There is an unfortunate side effect by really leaning more into the talky side of things for dialogue and social interactions in Shadowdark, and that is the charisma stat or score or modifier. It is the least useful in Shadowdark out of all of them. It is probably not going to come up that often unless a monster, forces them to make a charisma check for whatever reason, or the class relies on charisma. And unless you're using, third-party published stuff, most classes don't use charisma at all for anything. So that is one of the drawbacks. Now, that was always a case with older versions of Dungeons and Dragons anyway. But that is certainly a drawback. I don't think the drawback that, the charisma score or modifier being less useful in Shadowdark is enough to say we should lean more into making dice rolls with charisma, because I actually think that is probably the worst response to have to that. What we want, and what my players have said, is it wouldn't be an issue, Fred, if there was a class that was charisma based. If there was a warlock, and there is a warlock, you can play a warlock in the game, okay? Or if I was playing like a sorcerer, and there are sorcerer classes. So that's sort of an easy fix in many respects. There is a section in the Shadowdark core rulebook that offers different modes of play. So you can increase and decrease the gameplay difficulty. Like this already existed in 5e's Dungeon Master Guide, right? Where you could increase and decrease, you could change the game around. And Shadowdark has about a page worth of these, and they're solid. They're good ideas, they're simple to implement, and they have fairly significant ways of changing your game. Allows you to customize how your game group works and your preferred play style. I'm a huge fan of them. I haven't used a lot of them, but we've looked at them and we have toyed with the idea of mucking with them. But because this is our first time round playing Shadowdark, we wanted to try and play it as close to what the rules were before we started moving and shuffling things around and applying variant rules or optional rules. But they are there, they are offered, and you don't have to go and find another book to use them. They exist, which is great, wonderful. Okay, let's talk about Shadowdark combat mechanics. One of the things that makes Dungeons and Dragons sort of stand out is combat. People will say that, Dungeons and Dragons is really just a combat simulator. Well, no, the reality is that when it comes to rules for combat, the thing you need rules for in a tabletop role-playing game is usually combat rather than other aspects, because there aren't really rules for role-playing fairies and dwarves and elves and things like that. That's just your imagination. But let's talk about combat and how that works. Turn order is simple. As I mentioned before, it's the usual Dungeons and Dragons initiative. Everybody rolls a 20-sided dice, you add your dexterity modifier, and when you add that up, you get a number, and you put it into order, and whoever's got the highest number goes first. Pick a direction, clockwise, anti-clockwise, really doesn't matter, and it's easy to learn, and it's easy to ignore. You don't have to use that initiative or turn order if you didn't really want to. Personally, I only ever have my players roll initiative once for the entire game session, whether there's combat or not. So I don't have to keep rolling over and over again. The only thing that gets re-rolled is a new set of monsters. I do that as the game master. So I don't have to wait for somebody to roll, I don't have to wait for Kirsty, Simon, Cajun, AJ Pickett, John, and JP to all roll their initiative every time we have a combat. It makes things a lot easier. That's just me. But this is still a simple system. You could just go clockwise, anti-clockwise. Quite often you'll find that, combat, it tends to be initiated. Whoever starts the initiation is probably the person who's going to do something first, which makes sense. There is only a 2-action economy in Shadowdark. What does that mean? Well, You get to move a certain distance. You get an action, which is probably an attack, cast a spell, or doing something else that's, up to the dungeon master in terms of what would be counted as an action. There's a thing called multitasking where you do lots of little things. And maybe you get a free action, but quite often free actions are connected to movement or actions anyway. So people's turn is completed quickly. It is very easy to complete a turn in 15 seconds because all you're doing is moving and action. Okay? Unlike something like modern D&D where there's bonus actions, reactions, no reactions in this game. You've got interactions, which is kind of like the old free action, although it kind of separated as well. You've got minor actions, swift actions. There's no 3-action economy. There's no 4-action economy. So everybody gets through their turn fairly quickly. Everybody gets a chance to do something and we move on. And that is a good thing. I think that is where all games need to wind up going. Shadowdark has done that. And you could say, well, basic D&D did that as well. Even I think AD&D might have done that as well. I don't think that there were... I think that was just basically move and action. Casting spells is simple. A small selection of spells. There's not that many. You can cast them with a spell casting check until you fail that check. So if you don't fail a check, you just keep casting that spell. It sounds too good to be true, but it actually works really well. I've never liked fancy and magic in Dungeons and Dragons, so this kind of gets rid of it. Combat is fast and simple. Most of the fights that I've run take between 2 and 5 minutes to complete, even at high levels of play. Even at level 8, it will take me 2 to 5 minutes to complete a combat, unless it's really complicated and things are going really badly. Sometimes it could take a little bit longer than 5 minutes. We're not talking about half an hour or an hour. I've seen people run Shadowdark and take them up much longer, but I think that is a product of too much pissing around, frankly. There are no opportunity attacks or attacks of opportunity, which is wonderful. I'm so glad. That has always been a problem. Basically, opportunity attacks interrupt somebody else's turn. They are the worst type of offender in any kind of game. And I know what they're trying to do. Because I've practiced as martial arts for years. I understand the concept of attacks of opportunity and opportunity attacks. Because I practiced for years. 3rd Dan black belt. But the problem is that game mechanics have never simulated the idea very well. And probably never will without bogging down the game. And this is an analog game. It is not a digital game played as a video game. It is an analog game. You have to treat it like an analog game. There is no point having opportunity attacks unless you insist on having that kind of detail. I think it's a great thing to do. Get rid of it. You don't need it. It's not that important. People move around the battlefield a lot more when you get rid of that sort of nonsense. Anyway, the number of combat encounters that you can complete in 2 or 3 hours, I found I can do 5 or more. 5 or more combat. And if you think about how long each of those combats are, 2 to 5 minutes, the vast majority of that time is not spent in combat. It'd be less than an hour. Heck, it'd probably be less than half an hour in 3 hours. And we can get through that much. Shadowdark is not designed to be a combat simulator. Okay? That doesn't mean it can't be tactical. It can be tactical. But it's not really refined. We're not counting squares. We're not getting too silly about things. And I really appreciate that. Really happy that that's the case. Weapons do a lot less damage because you're just, as I said, rolling the dice for your weapon or rolling the dice for your spell. There's no strength, dexterity, or other modifiers being added to that. And there are times, though, that some of the classes have a talent bonus. And that's a simple formula. It's either roll the damage dice, or if you have a talent that adds a damage bonus to your damage dice, then that formula is you just add that. There isn't add a ability modifier to the damage dice and another modifier as well. It's just the talent bonus. And talent bonuses don't come up that often. The fighter will get them. You might see something like that in other classes that have been built, but they're not a common feature, right? They are kind of very specific. So formula is really simple for damage. no inflated numbers. It means that nobody's ever doing huge quantities of damage, really, because you don't need to. Nothing has that many hit points. There's only one finesse weapon in the game. It is the dagger. No, the short sword is not a finesse weapon. For those of you who don't understand this concept, the short sword is not a finesse weapon. Yes, it is lighter and shorter than a long sword, a bastard sword, or a great sword. Yes, correct. That does not mean that it is a finesse weapon. What is a finesse weapon? You know, the true finesse weapons that we used that were based off speed rather than power and strength in real life in medieval times was the rapier and the dagger. Now, the rapier is not built like that in Shadowdark because guess what? There is no rapier in Shadowdark. Okay, there is no rapier. There's just the dagger. So if there is any other weapon that should be a finesse weapon that uses dexterity to attack with rather than strength when you're making a melee attack, the dagger makes sense. Punching somebody makes sense. Rapiers make sense. Daggers make sense. But there's no rapier in the game anyway. But the short sword is not included. Okay. Next, there is no dual wielding. You don't get to dual wield two weapons or make multiple attacks in Shadowdark. All the player characters get is one attack. Cast one spell on your turn or make one attack. This makes sense. Do you know why? If you've ever been involved in weapon training in martial arts, dual wielding swords or any kind of weapon is extremely hard as a skill to learn. It is very difficult to do it without hurting yourself. You're probably going to do more damage to yourself than somebody else. So that's the reality. In fact, you may even find that your combat efficiency is less unless you know exactly what you're doing. So that's one good aspect, because it's really, I don't like that 5e has dual wielding and anybody can dual wield. It's crazy. But also too, action economy. You can't break the action economy of Shadowdark if the players will only ever make one attack and they will only ever cast one spell. There's no bonus actions to cast spells. You get one spell or one attack. That is it. Nothing more. Monsters get more than one attack, but player characters can never change that. And that is actually smart. Now, why is that? Why do players get less actions as the monsters get more actions as they level up? It's because of action economy. It's really simple. There are less monsters and more players, almost always. That's generally how it works. Another really great thing that I've discovered too, which I didn't know I was going to like so much, but I have, and that is distance and movement. So movement speed, moving around. You're not moving in feet. You're not moving 5 feet, 10 feet, 30 feet. You're not using squares or hexes. You're using range increments. So close, it's all abstract. So close is about 5 feet or right up in front melee range. Near is basically more than 5 feet away. So maybe 10 feet to 30 feet roughly, something like that. That sort of distance. Double near is 30 plus feet. And then far is as far as you can see, but it is further than double near. Now, this abstract range system for movement saves time. It makes theatre of the mind much easier for me to run, and I think it will for everybody. What I did find, unfortunately, with using an abstract movement is some people like maps, and you don't have to use maps. When you're using abstract distance, you don't have to use maps. And some people like maps and like squares and like feet, and they like to move miniatures around or tokens. So it can confuse, I would say, a tiny fraction of the player base. There's one person in my group who does struggle visualizing in their head where they are and everybody else is. But we've actually been able to train that person to the point where they can deal with it. And they do struggle with visualizing stuff in space and in a scene. So that may be one issue you might have with abstract movement. I am also not a fan of double near. Double near, so it goes close, near, double near, far. Double near, I just ignore that because I don't care about anything that's sitting between near and far, so I just ignore it. That's just me. Yeah. I found that much easier to sort of deal with in my head in terms of comprehending what's going on. and for my players to understand. If we just have 3 zones, close, near, far, that's it. Cover rules. Cover rules in Shadowdark, interesting. Just apply disadvantage, roll 2 dice on your attack roll if something has cover. Very easy to remember. No numbers to add or subtract, and it should have been the rule in 5e. The rules for 5e for cover should have said, if you have more than half your body covered, you get a cover bonus, and that means anybody trying to attack you has disadvantage on their attack roll. Sweet, done, easy. And Shadowdark did that. Well done, Kelsey. Smart. There is risk at every single level of play when you're playing Shadowdark. It makes it exciting, it makes it challenging. It includes character death, so character death in 5e, unless you kind of really force the issue, Dungeon Masters aren't going to find that character death comes up that much, and neither will the players. It is pretty easy for a player to keep playing the same character and never really suffer death. Beyond level 10, it's almost impossible to kill them unless you really drive the nail down hard. But it is definitely a factor that comes in. What is weird about character death in Shadowdark is it could happen a lot, or it might not happen at all. And I know that sounds strange, but one of the things I've liked is that many people in my group, after playing 5e, now playing Shadowdark, are much more excited by the risk. They feel like there is trouble to be had, that they might lose their character. Then they're not really sort of thinking, I've got plenty of time. The chance of me dying is not a problem. If I do die, I'm going to just cast Raise Dead. There's no Raise Dead magic in Shadowdark. It doesn't exist. Your character dies, it is dead as a doorknob. So otherwise your Dungeon Master has to do something to make it happen. So how does death work? The death timer starts when the character drops to 0 hit points. If a monster drops to 0 hit points, they're usually dead. That's it. We don't use them anymore. But characters, they drop to 0 hit points. They're not dead yet. They're dying. You roll a 4-sided dice. You add your constitution modifier. That is how many rounds you have before you are dead. Now, character death is more likely to happen in modern D&D because of what is basically called instant death. Instant death doesn't really happen that much in Shadowdark. It is very unusual to see. Death is possible in Shadowdark, right? But instant death is very rare, even at low level, unless there's a monster special ability. And I would question a monster that has a special ability that can kill you outright. There are some that do exist in Shadowdark, okay? But the core rules don't really allow for that. You're going to have at least one round to do something before your character dies, whether that's cast healing magic, use a potion, pour a potion down somebody's throat, or stabilize the character. Okay, that is great. So happy to see that. Really, really happy that that's the case. But unless you're really stupid and you make stupid decisions, character death is not common in Shadowdark. It really isn't. It's only when they start doing really foolish things that things start coming apart. Now, when a monster is reduced to half its hit points, or half the monster group has been decimated, they must make what is called a morale check. They make a DC 15 wisdom check, and if they fail that, they flee. Okay? It's really simple. It's a hard check for most monsters. Monsters don't normally fight until they are dead, unless they are immune to morale checks. A lot of undead might be immune to running away. They just keep fighting till they die. But a lot of monsters don't. They do run. And this duplicates how monsters should operate and think, and it saves so much time. You don't have to play a combat out right to the very end till every single last hit point is removed, because you're using morale. And older versions of D&D like Basic and AD&D used morale checks. Well done. Well done. Include that into Shadowdark, which it has, is a great idea. The power of spells is not called the level. You get spell tier. Now, you know how spells in D&D, spell level used to get confused with character level. Well, there's no confusion now because they're called something else. It's called spell tier. There are 5 tiers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? And you don't have to worry about that confusion. I'm really happy to see that. Should have happened a long time for for modern D&D, but it hasn't. Spellcasting, how is that done? You roll a 20-sided dice and you add your stat modifier for whatever it is that you use for casting spells. For a wizard, you use intelligence modifier. For a priest, you use wisdom. For a sorcerer, you'd use charisma. For a warlock, you use charisma, whatever it might be, okay? And what you do is you take that number after you've rolled your 20-sided dice, added your spellcasting stat modifier to it, add them together, you compare it to 10 plus the spell tier. So you're not comparing it to a number attached to the monster, you're comparing it to how hard that spell should be to cast for you. So a tier 1 spell has a DC of 11. You get either 11 or higher, you succeed. You get less than that, you fail. There aren't saving throws. There's no ability checks. There's no attack rolls for spellcasting like modern D&D. There's just the spellcasting check. So one mechanic does everything, not 3. Okay? There are only spells that you know and you can attempt to cast. There's nothing that you know that you now have to prepare. So there's no such thing as known spells, and then a subset of that, prepared spells that you prepare for the day, and then a subset from that of how many spell slots you have, like modern D&D. So it's less confusing, less complicated, easy to play out. You might have only 3 spells as a wizard. You select those 3 spells, you can keep casting them until you fail. Spell descriptions are generally short, concise, well structured, so magic can be resolved quickly with little fuss. I love magic, I love playing wizards, and I'm so glad to see a system that takes that concept and strips it away. It's even more refined than basic D&D in my opinion. The Shadowdark spells are even more refined. There were only a couple of spells where we got a little confused, but even then it didn't take us that long to figure out what was going on. Not compared to some of the nonsense that you see in other versions of D&D. Spellcasting gets significantly more powerful as the tiers increase, because what she's done is she's taken level 1 to 9 spells and she's condensed them down into 5 tiers, so that means they're bunched. So going from tier 1 to tier 2, there's a big jump. Tier 2 to tier 3, huge jump. 3 to 4, huge jump. 4 to 5, wow. Okay, so you will find there's a huge shock to your system at higher levels of play when people are using higher tier spells. There's risk to casting spells. So you can lose access to those spells. Even though you could keep casting it, you could be forced to rest. If you lose your spell and you fail a check for your cure wounds or your magic missile, you don't get to use it for the rest of the day. You have to rest, eat some food, sleep, and then you get it back. Great. Wonderful way of doing it. Get rid of that nonsense Vancian system. I never liked it. The worst scenario is that a wizard might roll a 1 and have to roll a mishap table. At least only one class has got a mishap table right now in the core rulebook. So that's one thing. I like the idea that the wizard is kind of operating this way, where there's a chance of something bad happening if you roll a 1 on your spellcasting check. The cleric, if you roll a 1, you have to pay penance. You might have to give away food to the poor, or you might have to heal the sick. There might be all sorts of things you have to do for your god. So there are worst case scenarios. You don't want to roll a 1 on a spellcasting check for a wizard or a cleric or anything else, really. Shadowdark doesn't have the problem of having no spells to cast or running out of spells after one casting. Like modern D&D has a lot of spells. You get a lot of spells even if you're using spell slots, a spell slot system. But if you look at old D&D, like sometimes you only had 1 spell and you got to use that spell once and then you were out, and now you were going to be using a dagger or a staff, and that wasn't great. Shadowdark doesn't suffer this because clerics have 2 spells to choose from when they start off, and wizards get 3 spells. And the likelihood that you'll fail every single one of those checks as soon as you try to cast them is very unlikely. It could happen, it's possible, but it's not a huge possibility. So yes, there is the possibility of losing them straight away, but more likely you're going to get to cast them a few times so you don't have to constantly be resting. It's obvious that spellcasters at high levels of play, if you keep them alive, which can be hard to do, and they can get powerful enough, might actually be more powerful than modern D&D, which is a bit concerning. We've noticed this. If you combine that with luck tokens, spellcasters are just exponential growth. It is just scary as. So yeah, I haven't decided whether that's a problem. I think the solution is to reduce the number of luck points you have so that spellcasters start failing more spells. And that will probably help even things out along all of the classes. Shadowdark monsters. One of my favorite things is to make Shadowdark monsters. The Shadowdark monster stat blocks are generally very small and simple. A monster stat block is easy to understand and run. It has a shorthand format, so you have to learn that format, but it's not difficult to learn. It's very simple. Each monster has one sentence as a description, because there's no pictures and illustrations for every single monster in the book. So you need to have some sort of sentence to describe your monster to your player characters. The core rulebook has 200 plus monsters. Mostly, I would say, they've been taken from the standard reference document for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. There's a lot of monsters in there. In that little book, you've got enough to last you a long time. What illustrations of monsters that do exist are black and white lines. They're stylized horror. Sometimes they feel like they're not, but sometimes they definitely are. A lot of the illustrations of the creatures and monsters go back to old style D&D. It's a mix of, I see a mix of modern danger and the Twilight Zone. Sometimes I get that feeling of the Twilight Zone. Not always. Sometimes I feel it's kind of a bit cartoony. So there's a lot of traditional vanilla monster art and a lot of fantasy artwork that is on another level, particularly that cover, but there is other stuff in there as well. The majority of monsters have at least one special or interesting combat ability, outside of just bite, claw, and swing a weapon. That doesn't mean there aren't monsters in there that do that, but the vast majority do not do that. They have more than one thing going on. The monster stat blocks vary widely for any given monster level. So within level 1, you will find a lot of their numbers vary a lot. That's not really a desirable factor. I find that could be a little bit scary for anybody running a monster, but it seems to work. And I think the reason why it works is because the things that don't vary is how many hit points it will have, how many attacks it's likely to have, and the likely bonus for attack. But those first two are most important. Number of hit points and number of attacks seem to be the most important aspects of the monster. So the monster's 6 stats don't bother with the score. When you look at the stat block, it's just going to give you the modifier, not the score, just the modifier, which is something that modern Dungeons & Dragons should be doing. Should have adopted this. Should have got rid of the scores because they're not using the scores, so why are you putting them there? Just use the modifier. The guidelines and tools for making a new homebrewed monster are pretty good, but I would say about half the guidance you need is missing. Fortunately, I made a table which I put on my Patreon for free that allows you to build the whole thing. It gives you all the information you need and all the guidance you will need to do your own stuff. But she's done a reasonable job of giving you most of what you need. I think ultimately the most important information she did provide in the book, and the things that you might have been a bit unsure about, aren't in the book. And the reason for that is they weren't that important. Yeah. The monster generation and mutation tables offer plenty of ways to randomly create monsters for Shadowdark or modify an existing monster, which is great to see. Because the majority of the monster stat blocks are deliberately structured to be short, some monsters can appear to lack all the monster features that would make sense to you. And that is probably not a good thing, but what it does is it does force you to decide what is the most important thing about the monster, rather than getting too granular. And unfortunately, things like Pathfinder and D&D 5e get too granular, 4e gets too granular, and heck, 3.5 and version 3 got very granular. So yeah. Next, Shadowdark monsters are one of the easiest stat blocks to make for most versions of Dungeons & Dragons. I think the exception might be something like basic D&D. I think the stat blocks for them aren't that difficult to make, and advanced Dungeons & Dragons might be the exception. But compared to 5e, 4e, 3.5, 3, Shadowdark Monster is really easy to make. So the Dungeon Master tools in here are also really nice. I'm so impressed with the Dungeon Master tools. It's a huge section. It's a good chunk of the book. There are lots of useful tables and charts to help the Dungeon Master create and run everything for their game. There are plenty of magic items included in the book, but it doesn't dominate the book. It's not the bulk of the book. I can guarantee that. Everything in the Shadowdark game can be homebrewed and designed with much less fuss than most versions of Dungeons & Dragons, I find. You can homebrew and design to your heart's content, and it won't be that difficult to do. And she gives you the tools to do that. She gives you all the tables and instructions on how to approach and do that, which is great. There is downtime systems between adventures, so you can include these into your adventure. And like you could learn a skill, learn a language, you could carouse. My group have managed to include a lot more than that. They run a mine, they have an iron mine, so they run a business. They set up a fishing industry in a village. They are renovating a castle, and they're trying to bring prosperity to their village. Like, they can do a lot of things with their downtime. Things that aren't necessarily built into the Shadowdark book, but it's easy to apply. Not hard at all. You do not need a Bastion system, by the way. The front and rear of the inside covers of this book act as quick reference tools. Like, that is the front. And if you look at the back, she's done the same thing with the back of the book. She's given you what she thinks you'll need, right? You've got how to name your NPC, aspects of your NPC, distances, treasure, how much experience points to give out for certain types of treasure, what the equipment is, armor, difficulty class, dying, morale, how to do spells, distance, all that sort of stuff, falling. It's there. It's a good way to lay out a book. I really like the fact she's done this. I know that's a hard thing to do in a book because you have to have the right publisher, but she's done it great. Shadowdark has so few rules, you can hack and adjust the game to your heart's content. Unlike a lot of really heavy D&D versions where there's too many rules going on and you really can't pull it apart that easily, Shadowdark, there isn't much to pull apart. You could tack a lot more on if you really wanted to. I consider it the easier to prepare a game for Shadowdark compared to modern Dungeons & Dragons or even older versions of D&D, although I feel to a large extent older versions of D&D are actually not that difficult to prepare for. But there's still preparation time required. Even for Shadowdark, if you're if you like to prepare, rather than just make everything up as you play, there's still preparation required. It's not like it's a zero prep game. It isn't a zero prep game. I can assure you that now. For those of you who need to prep, it's not zero prep. You will still have to prep, maybe not just as much, and you may not have to spend as much time reading up on stuff because word count is a factor, right? Everything is concise. Shadowdark, in terms of my summary, Shadowdark is often referred to as an OSR game or an old school Renaissance or revival game or a system, and it's not. Shadowdark is not OSR, even though it includes a lot of OSR philosophy, and ways of thinking and ways of doing things. Heck, in some respects, even some of the mechanics. And then I've also heard people refer to Shadowdark as being a stripped-down, simple version of Dungeons & Dragons 5e or modern D&D. Again, it is not that either. It includes some aspects of their mechanics, but there are enough things that are different and enough ways of approaching the game that it's not 5e either. I think the core rules of Shadowdark are the most well-developed, streamlined, and evolved version of modern D&D, and that's what I consider this. This is not old D&D. This is modern D&D. It's just done really well. I honestly, this is why I talk about it so much. Shadowdark is probably one of the best versions of Dungeons & Dragons I've ever seen and ever played. And I have played basic D&D, 3.5, 4e, 5e. I've read the original rules, and I don't think I read Chainmail, and you need to understand Chainmail and read that to play original D&D. But I haven't read Chainmail specifically, not all of it. Some of it, but not all of it. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, I've read it, never really understood it. Whether it's first or second, it didn't matter. And they're not something that I would particularly like to play, because it was a chore to read them, and I think this does a much better job. It's why I have so much fun with it, and I recommend it to anybody who even considers playing this game. And that's all I have to say. And I've spoken for a long time, like 2 hours. Shadowdark is my favourite version of Dungeons & Dragons. And I do have Castles and Crusades, and I do have Mork Bork. I do not have Dungeon Crawl Classics. But right now, I feel like this is the right game to be building on. And I think it's the way of the future. At least for now. Anyway. So I'm going to get out of here. Thank you for watching and listening. Thank you for taking part in the poll. Huge thank you for everybody who's in chat. I am out of time and I must go to work. So wherever you are, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, or the night, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And I would like to say, I'm not just going to do Shadowdark stuff. I'm going to do other stuff as well. We're going back to 5e next week. We're going back to adventure writing in 5e next week. And 2024, I will be coming back to Shadowdark, but it won't be the only thing I'll be doing. And say, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Look after yourself.